Ladies and gentlemen, Hans Niemann has done it again. Hans Niemann just played a chess tournament in Croatia called the Tournament of Peace, a historic tournament that has been going on for many, many decades. Well, Hans brought everything to Zagreb, Croatia, except peace. Hans finished the tournament with 8 points out of 9, a performance rating of 2,946. In the last 10 years, that has been ranked among the top 5 all-time performances in a chess tournament, right underneath guys like Magnus Carlsen and Fabiano Caruana. Hans is on fire. He has gained like 30 to 40 points. He's nearly back to 2,700 elo. And in this video, I'm going to show you a gangster game that he played against the legendary grandmaster from Bulgaria, Ivan Cheparinov. That's all I have to say. There is no sponsor for today's video. The sponsor is you. All of you incredible people. Worth more than a queen, worth more than a rook, worth more than knight, bishop, king, all these pieces. We're going to look at this game from Hans Niemann's perspective, so we can sit for once in the shoes of a competent chess player, myself included. All right? Isn't it crazy Hans has a rating like 2,500 points higher than some of you? And me. So, Hans's opponent, Ivan Cheparinov, played the move c4. This is known as the English opening. It is a very good opening. It's a very historic and positional opening in the sense that it fights for the center in a positional way. White will oftentimes put the bishop on this long diagonal. It's not an opening that I recommend for many beginners and intermediate players because it's not so forcing, and the positions are a little bit too obscure and strategic and long-term and positional for you to play as a beginner, because as a beginner, you kind of have to worry about like looking both ways when you cross the street, right? Like beginners might leave the house with their pants on backwards, but the English is a completely reasonable opening at 2,700 level. Hans plays knight f6, which is an interesting decision when you look at Hans's second move, which is e5. So Hans clearly had something in mind here. And the thing about the English when white plays c4 is you don't know if white is going to play g3, bishop g2, or if white is going to play knight c3. Knight c3 is actually a pretty committal decision. For example, if black immediately plays e5, white might go here. And so white never put a knight on c3, and since white never put a knight on c3, black doesn't have a bishop that targets the knight on c3. By playing this move order, Hans invites the move knight c3, because maybe against this, he's going to play something else. Cheparinov plays knight c3, so now Hans says, all right, cool, e5. Okay, so he goes back to playing the central move e5, and we have a 4 knights English. And in this position, there have been many games played. For example, e3, d4. e4 is modern, giving up the d4 square, giving up a little bit of dark square control. g3 is the historic main line, and it is chosen in this position as well. The idea is to develop the bishop to g2. You will notice white has not touched a center pawn, right? He has not. E and d pawns are going to wait. They're going to either step like this, or 2, right? Or maybe we just go with the d pawn, we leave the e pawn at home for a little bit, no problem. All right? And now black plays bishop to b4, which is the entire reason that I think Hans delayed the move e5 until white went knight c3, and then he went for this system. Because I have a feeling he would have done something different, you know, if Cheparinov would have done something different if e5 happened on the first move, and Hans would have done something different if Cheparinov played slightly, etc., etc., etc. We just keep going and going, right? So, bishop b4. And black has a very simple idea. Black wants to take. Like, black would like to take. So, in the game, Cheparinov plays knight d5 right away. And in many lines here, black is actually completely fine taking the knight, and then playing d6 and building up on the dark squares. But black also doesn't have to do that at all. Black can basically leave the bishop there until, let's say, a3 happens. And, you know, then you're more than happy to capture, because you were going to do it anyway. The bishop b4, Cheparinov plays this move, knight d5. Notice how nobody's thinking. We're still in the opening. Life is still good. The idea of knight d5 is to hit a couple of pieces, get out of the way of the bishop, basically rendering it stupid. And this exchange is very bad for black, excuse me, not just because you lose the defender of your pawn, but because after something like this, the c file is a huge problem. So take, that's not an issue. But in the future, you know, white is going to castle, develop, and just the pressure here is going to be really annoying. And white is just comfortably better the entire game. So it's really not worth taking the knight. Instead, Hans basically says, look, you haven't touched the center, right? You're playing in this goofy way where your knights are dancing and everything. So now I'm going to seize control of the center myself with this move e4, right? And your knight cannot go there. So black says, I win space and I win time, and I force your knight to the edge of the board, right? And white says, okay, I'm fine putting my knight on the edge of the board because you overextended, and now I'm going to go here and I'm going to target this just as long as I don't blunder my king. At the same time, black is saying, I don't care if you take my bishop. Literally, like black just castles. Black says, go ahead and take my bishop because then you lose an active piece. By the time you're trying to finish up your development, suddenly I'm trapping your knight, right? Like your knight is just stranded on the edge of the board. So, you could almost say like both sides are trying to get something that they want, and both sides are kind of, it's like they're playing chess almost. Wow. I guess that's what they're doing, right? It's a silent mental battle of you want this and I want this, but I want that. Well, then give me a little bit of this. A lot of dynamics at play, right? So knight h4 castles, and now something very interesting. In this position, Cheparinov plays a move that has been played like less than 1% of the time. Allow me to explain. Historically, white has left the knight here. White doesn't take anything. White develops. Black develops and defends his pawn. White castles. And then basically at some point, black says, you know what? I think I waited a long time. So maybe I'm going to bring my bishop back, like to c5 right now. Or I'm going to get taken, and then white, goes something like d3, and then after, let's say, take, black plays like knight e5. Oh, that would be really nice, but... And then black brings the bishop back to c5, okay? Black just, like, take, bishop c... And the bishop's... All right. The bishop's like, it served its purpose, now it needs to reposition and target a certain side of the board. Historically, that is how this position has been played. It's a very balanced game, very interesting game, very dynamic position. But in this position, Cheparinov plays a3. Which is a way to play this position that, of course, is completely logical and yet totally illogical at the same time. Because welcome to 2700 level chess. Why would you play a3 if the bishop is going to go back anyway? Observe what I just did, right? Bishop g2, rook e8, and then like bishop c5. Or d6, and after a big exchange, the bishop goes back to c5 anyway. So before black does anything else, he's going to reposition his bishop. So why would Cheparinov play the move a3? Like, why would he tell Hans Niemann exactly where to put his bishop? Well, it's probably some sort of preparation, right? When a guy plays something that is surprising at the 700 level, it might be good, but chances are it's bad. Like a lot of you study openings when you're 1200, 1400, 600, a little bit too early at 600, but if you're like 1200, you're studying an opening, there's a very good chance that the move that your opponent played that's not in your opening course or your video is probably bad. But if you can't exploit it, it might actually be a really good move. Like if a move is horrible, but only because of one reason, and other than that, it's like winning, it's a pretty good move at 1200 level because it has to be punished, right? So at this level, it's like, well, he played something unique, which means that worst case scenario, it's just equal, okay? d6. d6 is important because otherwise there's b4 and the bishop will get trapped, okay? b4, bishop b6, and something like c5. So d6 is played, okay? Now, if b4, Hans can play bishop d4, he can also go here and never have to worry about this move happening. So white castles, and Hans plays rook e8. So Hans has fulfilled the destiny of his opening, right? He's spending a little bit of time here, spend a little time, d6, rook e8. And now the only way Cheparinov can make progress in this position is either to play d3, trading off black's very powerful center pawn, which is very well anchored, or b4. Right, b4 makes a lot of sense because you take space, you can put your bishop on this diagonal, and then your knight can re-enter the game when it's ready. But there is the question kind of at all times of g5. Can't do it now because you'd lose because knight takes f6. But there, I mean, again, there is a very clear question of like, at some point, black can trap this knight, especially if it doesn't actually have a home to go to. So Cheparinov plays d3. Spends 1 minute, he plays the move d3, and black really cannot hang on to the center blockade because of the pressure on his knight. Also, if black makes a waiting move, white is going to play bishop g5, at which point black is in a lot of trouble. PP on the PP. So black needs to do something right now. He takes the pawn on d3, as has happened historically many times in this position. Cheparinov plays queen takes, Now, that trade benefits white because you remove the blockade, and the bishop is strong, and the queen is out, but the trade-off of having no more blockade and a powerful bishop and a queen out is that black has the open e-file, and black can attack your queen and pawn, right? So, like I said, chess is give and take. Hans plays knight to e5, and Shaporinov plays queen c2. This position has actually been reached once ever before. According to the database, the Masters database, it was between a 2500 and a 2200 rated player, and in that game, black followed up the very logical move, knight to e5, which attacks the queen, with a move that says, look, I've had enough of your knight here, please leave. See, black could develop the bishop, but then you still get hit with this move. It's very unpleasant, because like I already told you, taking here is bad, because this file is very annoying to open up, and black is in, you know, black really has nothing they can do here, unless black gets a pawn involved. But let's not forget, that move by Shaporinov lost a little time. Like, he played this opening in a very slightly different way, and yet it's quite a big difference, right? It's quite a big difference. So, bishop c5 back, right? In the opening is the move that was trying to be avoided, or rather, not avoided. It was the move that Shaporinov, he played a3 to try to maybe throw Hans off a little bit, but we fast forward to the middle game, and now black plays c6. So black follows up the very natural knight to e5 with the move c6, and this knight has to go somewhere. It does. Shaporinov goes back to c3. And officially, we have reached territory that nobody has explored yet. Knight c3. Queen c2. c6. Okay? In that game between the 25 and 2200 rated player, I believe played in Brazil, white went knight e3, which kept the pawn defended, but it blocked in the bishop. But then, of course, white can play b4 or b3 and get the bishop out this way. In this game, we have knight c3. Shaporinov is daring Hans Niemann to take the pawn on c4. And from this point forward, this man, Hans Niemann, popped off. If you don't know what popped off means, you're about to find out. Shaporinov played knight c3 and said, Hans, I dare you to take my pawn. Now, if Hans chickened out and instead played like a5, protecting b4, we would have gotten b3, bishop d7, let's say bishop b2, and a game would have developed where all the pieces were out, one pawn was traded, and it was a big tens battle. But instead of that, Hans took the pawn. So now, black is a pawn up. Clean pawn. The only reason it's not -1 for black is because white has counterplay. Shaporinov came prepared with an idea, and his idea was knight to a4. The queen now attacks the knight. The knight attacks the bishop. I mean, it has eyes on the bishop. That is basically the point. However, if black is able to defend this knight, then you're good against this, right? But if you move the knight, then of course after take, not only does white win the pawn back, white also has two bishops. White will play here, white will put the rooks on the open file, white will be very happy. So Hans took on c4, and then he basically just said, okay, bishop e6. What's the idea? I don't understand. Like, you gave me a pawn. Now, you do have a way to win it back here. Now, Shaporinov in the game played rook d1. He spent 9 minutes, he played rook d1. The way that he can win the pawn back here is by playing b3 potentially, right? The idea of b3 is that if the knight moves, you're going to hit this twice. But it's not over because knight a5, wait a minute. And that's why Hans's bishop e6 was such a clever defensive idea. Now you can take rook b1, defending that pawn against these two pieces because the two pieces would be better than winning the rook and the pawn. So just to put that on the board, getting a knight and a bishop is very good for white. So instead of that, black would just have pressure here. And for example, if white would just have pressure on c5. Let's say white went queen e7. Oh my god, I can't say white and black. Queen e7, right? Then here comes the knight. Suddenly, that knight comes alive. And white is putting a lot of pressure on the position. The side with the bishops wants to make trades, even if sometimes it's for a pawn. Because if you look, despite being 2 pawns up in this position, it's actually white who is calling the shots. It's white who is pressuring everything. You could be 3 pawns up for half a second. And I take this, and then I take the knight, right? So that's the idea. That is the idea that white has. White wants to open up the position. But Cheparinov must have not liked something about b3 because he very, very quickly decided, you know what, I'm not going to go for this idea, despite, you know, it being a very natural follow-up. Like Cheparinov 100% considered this move. Instead, he played rook d1, and he probably thought, I'm pinning the pawn to the queen, so the threat is to take the bishop, right? And now, you know, black can go here or here. And he probably thought Hans is going to play queen e7, and then I'm going to play e4 or b3, etc., etc. But rook d1 was a mistake. And it was a mistake because white is now no longer calling the shots. This move very naturally brought the rook out from where it was, stuck, to pressuring, doing exactly what a rook should do, right? Adding more pressure, looking to bring another piece to the party. Unfortunately, one thing Cheparinov did not anticipate here was just how much he was weakening his own king. When I say that, you might think, but how is that even... Because the bishop's hanging. So knight g4 doesn't do anything, it just loses a bishop. Right, you're right. Yeah, but what if Hans Niemann in this position sacrifices the... What? Bishop takes f2. He just given up the whole bishop. He says, you want it? Take it. Take it, you want it so bad. You gotta take it. I mean, if you don't take it, then black will in fact play knight g4 and it's over. I mean, black will then get the pawn out of the way, bring the bishop back, play knight f2. I mean, it's just a matter of time. You come here and fork everybody. So bishop takes f2, king takes f2. But what is the follow-up? I don't understand. The queen cannot come, help. Okay. So Hans plays knight g4. And here Cheparinov walks to the middle. He joins forces with his pieces. He could have played king g1, but then this move would have become possible. You know how? Because then Hans would have played b5. And suddenly it's a very difficult position for white. The knight is hanging, and queen b6 is game over for white. Like, game over. h3 is possible, but then I go here. So now you are forked, and I'm threatening your knight as a nice little bonus. So you can't do this. I mean, we can go on a really long sequence of moves here. Like, let's say knight takes g2, and then knight takes g2, and then I take, but at the end of it, black emerges with a better position. So b5 was a key idea, and even though white can get a lot of pressure here, I mean, it's crazy. Just stripping open the king's position here is a really, really, really good attack for black. So instead of that, Cheparinov played king e1, which you see Stockfish does not like, okay? Stockfish doesn't like it. And I gotta tell you, by the way, king e1 does not take any of the pressure off with the move b5. Does not take any pressure off with the move b5. Because now, where do you move the knight? If you move the knight back to c3, I got news for you. I'm still going here, and you cannot stop queen f2. It is unstoppable. You could play knight to e4, then I go to g1, which is even worse. So we were trying to stop queen f2 before, but now we can't even stop queen g1. So b5, and the entire position is about to collapse for Cheparinov. He needs to play perfect computer defense. And to his credit, he actually finds the best move here, according to the engine, which is rook to d4. The idea of rook to d4 is to keep an eye on both horses. So if black takes the knight, what you do is you grab two pieces on the way out. And now black's attack is extinguished. Black comes in and runs out of attacking pieces. And actually, white is better now. So instead of that, Hans Niemann doesn't take the knight. But this is now a constant threat. You understand? The threat is more valuable than the execution in chess. The queen is ready to go here the second the knight takes its eye off the square. The knight doesn't want to take its eye off the square because then the queen will go there. But black can't take the knight because then he gets this taken, so he plays knight e3. So now, black threatens this and has an eye on that and continues to have an eye on that. Cheparinov takes the knight. Hans spent quite a bit of time there, right? That was a key moment. Takes. And now, targeted and targeted. And at the end of the day, Hans Niemann does not need to end an attack with a checkmate. He can end an attack with just, right? Queen c3, which targets the knight. And now just a very simple and straightforward solution to the position. Of course, Hans can take, and then he can take. Of course. That is the simplest thing to do here. Take and take. And then let's say this, Hans is just a clean pawn up. Targets the rook. If the rook takes, he takes on b2. If queen d6, you win with rook d8. So, Hans is winning. And yet, he plays bishop d5. The most precise way to win, and it's not taking any of the pressure off of White's throat. He's got the foot on the neck. It is a dominant position. You now open up the rook, defending the knight. The knight is pressuring the white position, ready to jump in at a moment's notice. The knight here went there on move 6, literally. Knight to h4 was White's 6th move. And now we fast forward some 20 moves into the future. Black is roaring forward the attack, and the knight is still there, standing around like a spectator. White plays bishop to e. Oh, interesting. So it looks like a mouse slip, looks like an over-the-board mouse slip, but he's trying to disconnect the rook from the knight. So if this, queen e3, right? That's what happens. And now Hans slides back to make sure his bishop doesn't get taken. He attacks the queen goes here, and now he takes the knight. Now we can all exhale. Hans now emerges from the attack, up 2 pawns. White could try to win the pawn back, right? Which is what he does in the game. So Cheparinov is now down a pawn, but Hans has 6 minutes. That's not a huge amount of time, right? Hans plays rook e5. The idea of rook e5 is to build behind the rook. It's to triple up the pressure because the king went to the middle. Rook e5 is a great move, but rook e5 has a hidden idea, which I'm not going to tell you about just yet. You are going to have to see it for yourself. Rook e5 looks like it stabilizes the board and pressures, and you want extra space behind the rook, but there's a key important detail that you might miss. In this position, Cheparinov played rook d4. And the move he overlooked is g5. And he resigned. What? The idea of rook e5 was not just to defend the position and to triple up behind the rook. The idea of rook e5 was to remove the f5 square from the knight and pawn to g5, trap the knight in its tracks. You could not play g5 now because white would play here. You would still be winning, but the knight would be free. The idea of rook e5 was actually to restrict this knight from moving to its final safe square, bringing the pawn in front of the king, and brutally winning it. Hans targeted that knight the same exact way he targeted the knight on the other side of the board. And I mean, it is a mini lesson in and of itself. Knights on the edge of the board, right? Knights on the rim are grim, are dim, are slim, are Jim. All right? The quality of horses is very different. One horse planted itself in front of its opponent's position and wreaked havoc. The other 2 ponies literally perished on the outskirts of the board, and Hans won this game with incredible vision on the queen side, vision on the king side, and good principled play in the center of the board, right? Like planting the knight on e3, centralizing the bishop on the d5 square. And this was just one of many brutal games that Hans detonated upon his opponents in Croatia. He gained, I think, some 30 rating points, crossing back to the 2,700 rated barrier. He's currently playing the last chess tournament, I believe, of 2023 for him, which is the London Chess Classic. His first round was uneventful. It was a relatively straightforward, boring draw, but he dominated this tournament from start to finish. And then he tweeted, which I suppose is like standard protocol now. I will show you his tweet. His tweet was as follows. He said, it was a picture of himself, and then it was a picture of Bobby Fischer, and it said, 2 lone Americans up against the world, facing immeasurable odds, victorious 53 years apart at the legendary Croatian Chess Tournament of Peace. Hans said 8 out of 9, 2946 performance rating. I know of no better life purpose than to perish in attempting the great and the impossible. And there you have it, boys and girls. That was the Hans Niemann tournament performance in Zagreb, Croatia, Tournament of Peace. And if it's not clear enough, the man's role model is certainly Bobby Fischer. He tweeted out a Bobby Fischer quote earlier in the event. And my only complaint, listen, I love the social media stuff after the games are played. My only complaint is that is a violation of the chess speaking for itself, which I'm okay with. I mean, if we can collectively agree that we have moved on from the chess speaking for itself and now Hans Niemann speaks for himself, God bless. I am on board. The Hans Niemann comeback train is right now full steam ahead. And then there was like some quote that came out by the organizer. That allegedly there was a tweet by Tarjei Svensson, Norwegian journalist, who basically said that the organizer said that like we had indications of things wrong with Hans, but no reports by the players. It was crazy. And then people were like, so look, TLDR is that now this is going to be a thing in every tournament Hans plays. You got two sides of it. If Hans does poorly, people are going to say, well, you see, he cheated earlier, but now he's not. And if he does really well, people are going to say, well, he's just cheating. So I don't know when this is going to go away or if it ever will go away. But this is the reality we live in. Hans Niemann just played an incredible tournament. I might cover a couple of his other games because you guys do enjoy watching the Hans Niemann comeback tour. And we will see. The chess will speak for itself until it does not. I will speak for myself until I do not. And that's all I have for you today. Happy December. If you want to attend the event in Toronto on December 7th, when I'm there for the Champions Chess Tour Finals, I'll do an event, book signing, live guest Elo. Tickets are running out, so get them fast. That's all I have for you today. Get out of here.